In an age of dreadnoughts and cruisers, there was another kind of warship, small, shallow, and unglamorous. Built not for the open ocean, but for the twisting rivers of empire. These were the insect-class gunboats, a fleet of steel insects that crawled up rivers, through swamps and estuaries, bringing the power of the Royal Navy to places where no battleship could ever go. They were born in the First World War. But their story would stretch across half a century, from the muddy banks of Mesopotamia, to the burning ports of China, and the deserts of North Africa. When war broke out in 1914, the British Empire found itself fighting not only on the fields of France, but across its far-flung territories. In Mesopotamia, modern-day Iraq, British and Indian forces struggled to push up the Tigris and Euphrates rivers against Ottoman resistance. But the great warships of the Royal Navy were useless in such shallow, winding waters. The army needed something new, ships that could fight upriver, deliver firepower, and support troops directly on shore. The Admiralty responded with urgency. From shipyards on the Clyde and the Tyne came a new class of vessel, small, flat-bottomed, and heavily armed for their size. They were ugly to look at, but deadly efficient. They were the insect-class gunboats, named after creatures that could sting far above their size. The insect-class gunboats were marvels of practical engineering. They displaced about 625 tons, roughly the weight of a modern corvette superstructure, and measured 237 feet long, with a draft of barely 4 feet. That shallow hull allowed them to sail through rivers barely deep enough for a barge. Each carried 2 6-inch guns, the same caliber used on light cruisers, one mounted fore and one aft. They also had smaller anti-aircraft guns and machine guns for close defense. Inside, they were cramped, hot, and smelled of oil and river water. But they could go where few other ships dared, and deliver serious firepower once they got there. To the soldiers slogging through Mesopotamia, they were a godsend. These small gunboats could creep up to the riverbanks, shell enemy trenches, and cover amphibious crossings. Their presence meant survival, and the difference between a failed offensive and victory. They were named like their insect counterparts: Aphis, bee, cicala, cockchafer, gnat, ladybird, mantis, moth, tarantula, and scarab, among others. Names that at first sounded whimsical, even comical. But soon, they would earn a reputation that was anything but. In the heat of the Mesopotamian campaign, HMS Mantis and HMS Moth supported the push toward Baghdad, bombarding Ottoman positions and guarding supply convoys. HMS Tarantula was credited with destroying several enemy batteries along the riverbanks. They were slow, barely 14 knots, but they could turn on a sixpence and operate in channels too narrow for larger ships. By the end of the First World War, the insect class had proven their worth beyond doubt. But rather than being scrapped or mothballed, they were kept in service. The British Empire still had rivers to patrol and rebellions to quell. When peace came in 1918, the insects didn't return home. Instead, they spread out to China, the Yangtze, the Nile, the Danube, and the Dniester. Wherever the empire had interests, these little gunboats followed. In China, they became part of the China Station, based at Shanghai. There, amid the chaos of civil war, banditry, and Japanese expansion, the insect-class ships became floating islands of British authority. They protected nationals, escorted merchant ships, and occasionally shelled hostile river forts. To local populations, the sight of an insect-class gunboat flying the white ensign up a river was unmistakable, a signal that the Royal Navy had arrived, and that British power extended even to the heart of Asia. HMS Cockchafer and HMS Gnat became fixtures of the Yangtze Patrol, their crews enduring the sweltering summers and monsoon floods. Life aboard was monotonous but dangerous, the threat of ambushes or sudden attacks was ever present. And as Japan's power grew in the 1930s, those dangers only multiplied. By the 1930s, the insect class were already old ships, more than a decade past their design life, their steel hulls rusting and engines worn. But the Royal Navy could not replace them easily. no new class of river gunboat had been built to take their place. Instead, the old insects soldiered on. They were refitted, rearmed, and sent wherever trouble flared. Some patrolled the Danube, others the Nile, a few the Yangtze and Amoy rivers in China. It was an unglamorous existence, long months of boredom punctuated by moments of chaos. Their crews became experts in diplomacy as much as warfare, mediating local disputes and protecting foreign nationals as revolutions and wars swept through Asia. When the Second World War erupted, the insect class found themselves once again in the thick of it. By then, they were veterans of 2 decades of imperial policing, but war demanded more of them than ever before. In the Mediterranean, the HMS Ladybird, Gnat, and Scarab were sent to support British forces in North Africa. They operated along the Egyptian coast and up the Nile, providing artillery support against Axis positions. Their heavy 6-inch guns, though ancient, proved devastating against shore targets. In 1941, HMS Ladybird fought near Tobruk, bombarding German and Italian forces advancing toward the port. Under constant air attack, she refused to withdraw until she was struck and set ablaze by dive bombers. Her wreck became a symbol of defiance, a small river gunboat standing up to the Luftwaffe. Her sister ship HMS Gnat met a similar fate. While supporting British troops off Libya, she was torpedoed by an Italian submarine. Though crippled, she was towed back to Alexandria and used as a floating anti-aircraft battery. Even half-sunk, she continued to fight. HMS Scarab, meanwhile, endured the entire North African campaign, firing her guns in support of 8th Army troops from El Alamein to Tunisia. For such small ships, their contribution was immense, their presence often decisive in coastal and riverine operations where heavier ships could not go. In Asia, several insect-class gunboats met grim fates as Japan swept across the Pacific. HMS Sakala, based in Hong Kong, fought during the Japanese invasion in December 1941. For days, she provided gunfire support to British defenders, holding off advancing troops until she was overwhelmed by air attack. Her crew scuttled her to prevent capture. HMS Moth, stationed in Shanghai, was also scuttled when the Japanese advanced, but her story did not end there. The Japanese raised and repaired her, commissioning her into their own navy as HIJMS Suma. Ironically, the British-built gunboat that once symbolized imperial power now fought under a rising sun flag, a cruel twist of fate. Elsewhere, HMS B, Cockchafer, and others continued service in secondary roles, patrolling rivers in Burma and India, or guarding harbors in the Middle East. When the war ended in 1945, the world that had built the insect class was gone. The British Empire was shrinking, and river gunboats were no longer the tools of diplomacy or power they once were. Most were worn beyond repair, their riveted hulls pitted, engines tired, and their technology outdated by decades. Some, like HMS Scarab, served briefly into the post-war years before being scrapped in the late 1940s. A few lingered as accommodation ships or training hulks. By the 1950s, they had all disappeared from active service. But their influence lived on. They inspired future designs for shallow draft patrol craft, and their wartime service in 2 global conflicts made them among the longest-serving vessels in Royal Navy history. The insect class were never glamorous ships. They were small, cramped, and often forgotten, overshadowed by the great fleets of battleships and aircraft carriers. Yet, they embodied the quiet resilience that defined the Royal Navy across 2 world wars. They were ships of stubborn endurance, working in the world's harshest conditions. They carried Britain's flag up rivers no cruiser could navigate, and they fought in places most sailors never dreamed of seeing. They were the Empire's frontier guards, the steel insects that stung whenever challenged. Their contribution was not measured in tonnage or speed, but in persistence, in the fact that wherever there was a river to fight on, the white ensign could be found fluttering in the humid breeze. From the Tigris to the Nile, from the Yangtze to Tobruk, the insect class proved one enduring truth: that sometimes, the smallest ships can carry the heaviest weight of history. By the time the last insect-class gunboat was scrapped, the age of river gunboats was over. Aircraft, missiles, and mechanized armies had changed the shape of warfare forever. But in their time, these little ships had done what no other could. They had brought heavy guns to the shallows, carried empire on their decks, and fought 2 world wars against all odds. They were, in every sense, warriors of the rivers, humble in appearance, heroic in action, and unforgettable in spirit. The insect class may have been small, but their story towers among the greatest in the annals of naval history. From the gun decks to the bridge, every story we tell honors those who served. If this tale made you feel the salt and steel of history, give it a like, and if you're not yet part of our channel's convoy, subscribe and join the ranks. More powerful stories await.